So welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I'm thrilled to have David Yu back with me. David is a good friend. He's sitting in Shanghai tonight, or I should say this morning in Shanghai. David is an acclaimed aircraft investor. He is a professor at NYU in the Shanghai campus, where he teaches finance, mergers and acquisitions, structured financing, cross-border valuations, and just an all-around aviation airline expert and a great guy. So thanks for coming back on, David. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Craig, for having me.
So let's talk about big stuff happening. And obviously, a couple of things happening economically right now that's got to, people, I don't know if they're worried or if they're just keeping an eye out for them, but obviously interest rates in the U.S. are going up. That's going to affect the global economy. We've got supply chain stuff. And then obviously where you are now is, China has become one of the world's biggest aviation consumers. So let's just talk about a couple of those things and see how that's all going to play out over the next 9 to 12 months.
Sounds good.
So what's the Fed? So the Fed's going to raise. They need to. Inflation's rampant in the United States. I think we saw the 10-year at 1.9 the other day. So it's at probably a 24-month high. Where do we go from here?
Well, look, this rising inflation is not a temporary spike, and this is what that has the Fed concerned, right? And what people in the market and are expecting, and what the Fed has been hinting at, is that there will be rises going forward this year. The question then becomes how many interest rate rises are there? And if you think about it, many people actually believe that there will be 4 separate hikes this year, and a lot of people, the market consensus really shows that. But if you think about it, there's been some additional divergent views on this, where BlackRock just came back yesterday and say, "Hey, maybe that's over. That's a bit too much, and maybe they won't do it as much." Well, this is up to different pundits, and obviously we all have our own thoughts. But how does this affect our space? Well, look, if you think about it, large asset-based investing assets in general really need financing, right? So the lower the interest rates, the more ability to borrow, as well as the values overall of assets go higher. And this is exactly what you have seen in aviation assets, along with other real asset classes, like real estate, etc. And one of the other things that you see is that people have this hunt for yield. So you see people going from because you're getting very low rates on existing investments, so they're trying to up tier. So they're going. A lot of people have gone into aircraft ABS,
right,
and the assets itself. So it's a big impact overall, and I think this is something we should actually look at, how this will affect both the lending side as well as the asset trading and pricing side.
Yeah. See, I agree with you. I don't think inflation, they talk about inflation's transitory. And I disagree totally. I mean, cost for pilots in the United States is going up. You're never going to back down their wages unless you find some sort of, unless, there's another mass layoff, but that's not going to go back down. Price of aircraft is going up because the supply chain is, still backed up. People are raising prices to accommodate that. I'm like, this is going to have a long-term effect. So prices may stabilize, but you're never going to see where they were, this 7, 8, 9% inflation rate that we're seeing now. It may be temporary, but it will plateau at a higher level. And that's, that's not good for anybody. Fuel isn't going to come down in price. I think that it's a new day. I think fuel prices will stay. I think, oil prices will probably stay at $80 to $90 a barrel for the foreseeable future, unless there's another supply chain, supply shock. There you go. Where do you see end of cheap money for borrowing end of cheap money for airplane, borrowing on airplanes?
I think if you think about it, this is it's good or bad depending where you sit on the spectrum, right? If your entire business model is based upon ability to borrow large of sums of money at very, very cheap rates and having very thin margins, then you're going to probably be in some difficulty.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because if these rates are as expected, then that thin margin will be really wiped out, and that will be really bad in terms of the overall business. But if you're in a good way, this really kind of helps the market in the sense that if you think about it from a long-term productivity point of view, this is where the creativity comes in. This is where people who have really good businesses will find a way to continue on even without reset higher cost basis. So this is what will create innovation throughout the system, and I think this will help also drive the reset of the overall industry, which is what I've been saying for the last few years now since COVID started.
But it helps, so air cap, air lease, some of your bigger, more established lessors. They've borrowed a lot of money cheaply. Their fleets are out there. They've got, thousands of airplanes out there. Does this really hurt? Does this give them a better competitive advantage over the Johnny-come-latelys who are now going to the market and saying, hey, we want a tranche? Or does it sort of, is the playing field still level?
I think it really becomes a question of what is your competitive advantage, right? What are you competing against? If you're just competing on pure cost, then from that perspective, the bigger players will definitely have an edge, given that their ability to tap the capital markets, et cetera. I think that is one advantage. Obviously, the contrary to that is the more in a rising cost basis environment. If you think about it, if you have large amounts of assets, obviously that's not going to be as good for your overall portfolio, so that will be a drag. So it's a balance per se, but at the end of the day, the question is, can you find opportunities that will be marginally better? So it will be additive compared to the Kazakh cushion, so that in case these things do rise, which they do, of course, this is a cyclical environment, and it's all what comes up comes down as well over time. This is the main aspect to consider. So how much planning is there and emphasis is there in your underwriting and risk elements?
What about the airline side of the house? I mean, obviously, everybody's looking at credits. I think you roll the dice on credit, what you may have considered to be a good credit a year or two ago. Nobody knows. A lot of airlines have, New Zealand, there's 777 parked for 600 days. So now it's out there in the market. You're probably going to start to see some wide body, but how do you account for that?
Look at it from a credit perspective, right? If you think about it, the main thing we rolled back 2 years ago, we basically look at existential risk. Are they going to continue to be alive going forward? And today, I think that risk has muted in some respects, but overall, it's still there. So now the market is very kind of divided between the people the airlines who can tap the capital markets and have access to funding, and the people who cannot. If you think about it, from the people who cannot, they were going to pay very large amounts to get funding, and that's not available. Now the bar is even higher. So that will make it much harder for them to continue just the same as before. But if you look at on the other side of the picture, the airlines, larger airlines who have capital markets access, they'll be able to, they'll still be able to, but it'll just be more expensive from that perspective. So that means their capacity to borrow when they have to renew these facilities will obviously, if everything else is equal, be shifted down. So ultimately, there is a expansion mode, right, at the moment, right? As you mentioned with Air New Zealand bringing back aircraft, and all. If you look at kind of capacity in the system, it's generally pretty close to pre-COVID times capacity-wise. So people
Right.
bring that on. But there's a lot of difficulties of bringing back parked aircraft, especially wide bodies and the large aspects. One of the things that people don't realize is during this time there might be some basically SBs and things that that OEMs need
Mm-hmm.
to be repaired or adjusted for these aircraft that weren't done in that period, that were issued during the period, and they must get done. So there could be potentially lots of costs
Yep.
to get these planes back up to normal operating conditions. And whenever, even if you have an old car, if you haven't used it for a long time or started it up every so often, then you're inevitably going to find things that are broken or need to be adjusted, et cetera. And they're going to have to do that. And but these guys are professionals. I think the key is going through these systems checks and getting these large, very large aircraft assets back online in a systematic way. But
Yeah, I think the thing that bothers me, what worries me is a lot of cost. There's a lot of cost elevation. Costs are going up. Demand is still iffy, and the demand is still price sensitive. So, how long do we take before we match, cost, the supply demand curve, how long is it till it really intersects and you start to find a real price, versus cost balance?
This is an important piece, right? At the moment, that divergence between narrow body and wide body still exists quite a lot, right? Because it's international versus domestic markets.
Yeah.
If you look at the domestic markets, the U.S. is still doing relatively well compared to other.
Everybody else is flat or down. Yeah, they're non-existent.
Exactly. Look at Europe. Size-wise, it might be the same, but obviously there's very many countries in that space, and they have who have different COVID policies, right? And that's affected some of the travel there. But the U.S. is obviously still contiguous from that perspective. But if you look at international traffic, still very much down. So that's still a bummer. Even though you see countries trying to reopen up, especially in Asia. You see the last 6 months or so, a lot of countries are trying to open up and get back to normalcy. So. And that's a great thing. So we try to, if that's the case, then there would be much more traffic and flow and the resurgence of some of these parked fleets that we're talking about.
How do you see supply chain? I mean, obviously supply chain's coming, supply chain's starting to come back. Obviously GE starting to make engines again. The airframe, you got, I don't know, what's Airbus doing now? 50 A320s a month now? Is that what they're ramping back up to? Boeing says we're going to get back to about 30 something. 730, Maxes. So the supply chain is starting to open up, and a lot of your component MROs around the world are still hurt a little bit. Parts, once again, there's that supply demand imbalance on the parts side. What are you forecasting from your point of view? How long to get it fixed?
Look, at the moment, if you look at kind of where the demand is, it's only certain markets at the moment, right? So OEMs, while they might be very happy to continue to sell down the pipe, the order book is still robust for a lot of products, but this will take time for digestion throughout the entire system. So it's not a quick fix, just like you were alluding to. And I think this will take definitely some more time. I would call it when the overall environment is changing. The passenger side is, as we discussed, it's not in a completely rebounded state. It's still in that initial kind of recovery mode. But if you look at it on the other flip side of things, the freight side, supply chain side is really going gangbusters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything's 100% booked. If you want to find capacity, it's very difficult. You really can't at the moment. These are main things that that are driving kind of the overarching kind of global supply chain issues that we're seeing today. The ships are also backed up. So this is an overall field, not just specifically to aviation.
But yeah, this is something that is interesting to me too. Let's just shift gears a little bit. We talk about freight. A lot of people now jumping in the freighter market. You looked at Qatar, big 777X freighter purchase. You see mammoth freighters now getting into the wide body. They're moving over to Dallas, and they've got their big freighter program going. You've got some other people that are jumping into the market. I'm seeing freighter deals happening all the time. People are committing. Freight is a big sine wave of, it's been a big supply. It's been a big sine wave. It's either really high in demand or people running for the exits. Are we getting ahead of ourselves?
Well, look, if you look at kind of where we are today, just capacity wise, right? Normally, 50% of the, in generality terms, of the capacity is coming from underbelly cargo space, right? And when you don't have any the international traffic, that's pretty much very muted, right? So, so you're going to have to compensate through dedicated freighters and other methods. So the question really becomes, when do we reopen? And that's going to be a big push. But even if we do reopen, how fast does that kind of come back online? So these are kind of the major questions, the big drivers of it. But ultimately, freight, I think, still has a good 4 or 5 years to go. I think.
Yeah, I just look at, I don't know what a 777X freighter costs. I got to think, book, retail, what, 300 million, 350? That's a pretty hefty borrowing cost on an airplane that flies 2 legs a day, flies there and back with a full belly. Now, e-commerce is not going away, and there's a lot to be saying for a changing global economy. But I look at the economics. I go, it must be for smarter people than me, because I don't know. I just the numbers, are pretty difficult to comprehend.
Well, large aircrafts, especially large factory freighters, will be pretty big numbers, right? As any of these assets are. So I think really, ultimately, it's a question of use case here. The question is, when are you going to get it? that's a very important piece. Just so that's what we said about part and recycle. But ultimately, you see a lot more conversion programs getting up and started at the moment. And this will be where a lot of the parked aircraft were just sitting there, haven't found second homes. Back to what we said before, that second tier of airlines who are struggling to find financing, and et cetera, those people are not taking as many new deliveries, sale and leasebacks, or not leasing in aircraft, and they're parking more of these aircraft. And that's where traditionally these older aircraft would have gone, right? So if they're not taking them, where would they do? They would be sitting there, so they'd be prime candidates for conversion, et cetera. So ultimately, this is where the cost aspect will definitely, if you think about it, if you're a cargo, you don't care if it's a brand new cabin or it's an old one, as long as you can get them, right?
Well, we were talking about C cubed aerospace before we came on. It's an STC, it's a A320 STC conversion, and the A320 is going to be a great airplane. It's going to be a great cargo. Great domestic, great regional cargo airplane. You probably pick one up, I don't know, $12 million, $15 million right now. Freshen up the engines, put the conversion in. You're all done at 25 million. It's a good number. You got 20 years of life left on the airframe. And it's a good number for, it's an interesting time. I just look at it, I go, wow, you think about, factory new cargo versus the conversion market. And it's just an interesting, dynamic as to how that plays out.
Absolutely, and I think ultimately it comes down to your kind of your timeline of how long you want to plan to operate, and kind of from that perspective. But as we all know, there's always a newer kid on the block, or a newer product on the block that might be better and sexier, right? But ultimately, does your economics work? Are you sustainable? And that's the main point, right? Are you going to make any money, or are you just bleeding money every time you run? That's
you're betting the come on this one. You're just betting the come. So that's the way it goes. But hey, so let's talk about China a little bit. Obviously, country was, affected by COVID. That hurts air travel. Is it coming back? What's happening? It's a huge consumer of aircraft and parts. What's happening in the region?
Yes, there's still travel, but it's not as to the level that we saw normally pre-COVID times. So this has been obviously a big shock to the airlines, Chinese airlines. This is actually what's happening every single major holiday, October 1 holidays, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not actually getting the benefit of high pricing, high demand. And high pass-throughs, so they're missing out on the best windows of making money. So this is not a great sign. But overall, there's other things that are benefiting cargo, et cetera.
Are you optimistic about where it's going? I mean, ultimately, is the country going to start to open up more gradually this year, or do you see it? Do you see it? No. Yes.
I don't see opening up until at earliest and like later this year. I don't see it. I don't see it. I'm not so optimistic in terms of opening up. But at the end of the day, I think where the airlines sit, though, I don't think they'll get worse from that perspective.
Right.
I think there's only a lot more upside. There's not too much more downside from that perspective.
There's only one way to go when you're at rock bottom. There's only one way to go, right? That's it's up, and you just hope it comes quick.
Exactly. Look, international is still very, very restricted, and I think once that opens up, that will bring a whole lot more revenues from that point of view. And domestically, it's been up and down. It's been a yo-yo, right? It's been a fast rebound post the initial lockdown, but afterward, it's been up and down with some of these this health kind of flare-ups, I would call it. So we have good basis. The question is, can we get the rest of it under control?
Yeah. What about Comac? Delivered its first airplane today. Is that what I heard?
No, not delivered. Not delivered. Not yet, anyways. Look, what they were planning to deliver at the end of last year, right? That was their initial goal, and they didn't obviously make it. And what they came out today was saying, basically, there's about 200 odd tests that need to get the CAACs asking for certification tests, and there's only been roughly about 40 or so. So there's still a room of testing that needs to be done. But they have said today that they plan to finish this year, and they are going to deliver the first aircraft to China Eastern.
Okay, that's all right. That's what I was hearing. That's what I was hearing about first delivery down the road. I guess I was mistaken. What's your forecast for the Comac aircraft? I mean, look, it's everybody wants to root for the home team, right? Do the Chinese domestic airlines make big orders for that, and at the expense of the Airbus and Boeing products, or do they go with the best airplane at the best value and what works for the balance sheets?
Look, in the beginning, the airlines are taking it and are going to try to use it. That's first off, right? That's not a question. The question then becomes, like you said, how much percentage is there? Right now, the 737 MAX is recertified, but yet no one has yet to fly it in China at the moment. So they're going through the testing stages at the moment. So the question is, when is that going to come back? The Neo, 320 Neo has obviously been very huge demand and doing very well. So ultimately, this dynamic here, I think, it's also a testing out of the equipment, et cetera. But, I think there's big hopes for it, of course. Mm-hmm. But let's see kind of how that kind of gets digested in the system, especially in this time where this uncertain demand, it has been yo-yoing demand from that perspective.
There you go. Good. How's your book doing? So you wrote a big book on aircraft financing, investing in aircraft and aircraft financing. Absolutely. How's it doing?
No, it's been good. I've done a ton of book talks, a ton of seminars about the topic, about what's happening, and the industry has really come back and come back with really interesting comments. I think this is the first, really, for those who don't know, this is the first book that really systematically has done a rigorous, comprehensive analysis of the entire market, really mapping out the market. It becomes less idiosyncratic, and seeing how, and ultimately this will give comfort to potential investors, financiers, et cetera, who really are looking at underlying kind of trends and characteristics so that we can underwrite more. And this is my goal, is to make it so that people can accept the industry and asset class even more than before. That was one of the biggest complaints, is not enough information about past kind of how has it done. So a lot of people say things, but this is something that will give them additional data points that they can.
Well, it's really the first textbook on. I mean, you're really the first author of any textbook on aircraft investing as an asset class. I mean, it's kind of it's the first one out there. It's very comprehensive. My guess is it's probably going to be a playbook for future generations as well.
Absolutely. Look, I think there'll be tons of things to update, like anything, any of these products. Right. I always want to update it, but ultimately, I think this will help a lot of people who's put their thoughts around this asset class and continue to learn and improve, and hopefully do stimulate more research, et cetera. So this is multiple goals from the book perspective.
So will airplanes be a good investment moving forward?
Look, absolutely. It depends. Everything is about how you pick things and underwrite things. So there's plenty of really interesting opportunities for investors. But the question really becomes what fits your risk and timeline perspective. So that to me is a key. Know yourself first, then go and look at the assets. So this combination of both.
Last question here. We just saw Spirit and Frontier Airlines merge, or Frontier buys Spirit. I suspect you'll see some other mergers of other airlines down the road. As the airlines merge, do we start to see a falling out? I mean, there's obviously a lot of new leasing companies out there, a lot of smaller boutique firms. Do we start to see them consolidate as well?
Well, let's put it this way. I've been saying that there will be consolidation in the airline space and lessor space since the beginning of 2000, since COVID started. So, right. So this is coming to a fruition from my perspective.
Your magic ball is clear.
Yeah, no, it's definitely happening. And ultimately, look, this will continue to happen, consolidation, this big drive. Look at GCAS AirCap creating this monster leasing company. But look, ultimately what's happening is this will continue to happen, but there is innovation. There's over 140, by my counts, new airlines are started up, all types around the world. So innovation still happens, but this will continue to happen.
Well, let's leave it at that one. And where do people find you, David? How do people get a hold of you?
Sure. Please feel free to email me, david.yu@nyu.edu. Feel free to reach out. I'd love to.
And where do they find your book?
You can find it on Amazon or the major retailers. It's online, so it makes it easy these days.
Awesome. We'll put a link up to it in the show notes as well.
That'd be great.
Cool, Dave. Thanks for coming on tonight. Enjoy the evening in Shanghai.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at NorthstarESG.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Pittman.